Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Bunker Show, coming to you live and direct from our secret bunker hidden beneath the sewers of Westminster, where we're going to be bringing you an action-packed show today, literally. And first of all, joining us in the bunker, here's the lady with the big smile. Here's Helen.
Good evening, everyone. Really happy to be here tonight and really looking forward to a great conversation with a really cool guest. So, yeah, looking forward to it. And join me in the chat room for any feedback, questions, anything like that. Come and say hello.
And also with us in the chat room in the bunker this evening, bringing a bit of sanity to affairs, here's Jimmy.
Oh, that's just not correct. Sanity? No, I don't know what that's about. Hi, guys. Glad to be here.
And before we jump straight into the show, I'd like to apologise for us making a hasty exit from the bunker last week and playing out with a little bit of music. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we did have one shout out for last week, which I just want to bring up now. And that is in regards to Chris Spivey. Chris, independent investigator who has his own website that investigates abuse, false flags, a lot of things that the mainstream media won't touch. And he was in court and charged and subsequently convicted, even without being able to face his accusers, on 2 counts of harassment. And because he was denied the opportunity to even question the veracity of the witnesses and their statements, he is, of course, appealing. So if anybody out there hasn't heard of Chris Spivey, go to chrisspivey.com and have a look at some of his work. If any of you out there can support him, even with a small donation to help towards his legal challenge, so that independent journalists and investigators can continue to do their job without being harassed by the state and the judicial system. But on with today's show, and we have an interesting guest today. Some call him Narkeh, some call him Anarchy. Hello, Anarchy.
Hello. How are you doing?
We're doing great here in the bunker. Could you, I guess, start by telling us why anarchy and how anarchy?
Well, thanks for having us. It's great to be here in the bunker amongst the flotsam and jetsam of Westminster. Notwithstanding all that detritus, obviously, but it's good to be with you good people. Anarchy is a pseudonym. Yeah, not that that's obvious or anything, but just to confirm, that is a pseudonym, so I'm operating kind of anonymously, barely anonymously. Those who know me by my other name. And I guess the reason for that is it's partly to do with some degree of personal security. It's also, I've been interested in mind control and how the establishment's sort of apparatus is geared up to fracture our personalities so that we're living with different people from one minute to the next. And I noticed that propensity in myself. I noticed my friends, people around me doing the same thing, that, you know, we'd step into these different personalities, and they're all sort of steered towards subservience to the existing structure. And I guess this particular character, Ann Narkeh, it's me owning owning an aspect of my personality and trying to steer it towards something more productive than minimum wage slavery and the like.
And of course, Anarchy has a job as an editor of a much needed publication. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Right, yeah, the Occupied Sun started in January this year, and there's a little bit of a backstory to that. So Occupied Democracy, who are a working group of Occupy London, were occupying Parliament Square from October last year. I'll just quickly run it down because not everybody will know about it because of media censorship. These activists held the space from October through to the general election. And, my sound's gone. Am I still here?
Yes, you're sounding better than you were.
Fantastic. Okay, so, yeah, Parliament Square, October. There was it's a decent-sized group of people, maybe 50, maybe 100-odd people holding the space, and just overwhelming, disproportionate police force to shut them down, ludicrously over a piece of tarpaulin which they were using to keep their arses dry on the grass at Parliament Square. They went in really heavy-handed, seized this tarpaulin, mass arrests. The whole thing was live-streamed, and myself, some friends, people from all over the country, incensed by what we were witnessing, snap decision just straight up to the square. And over the course of that week occupation, I think it was 9-10 days, that occupation, thousands of people from all over the country, all just flooding there. We're not having this. We're not having that sort of repression and suppression of our civil rights.
Because there's an interesting history between around Parliament Square, because after the original war in Iraq, a gentleman by the name of Brian Hoare occupied that space outside of Parliament to show that not just his, but many, a majority of this country's support for not going into Iraq, and the government changed the rules. And I think at one time they tried to get Brian to leave, but a judge ruled that because he'd started his protest before the law was changed, that he was exempt. And so it in terms of democracy, we find it very, very strange that they should outlaw anybody expressing themselves or using their democratic rights in that way. So, it has a really rich history. Yeah. And you said 9 days the tarpaulin stayed.
Yeah, well, and the occupation grew. At a debate in the House of Lords, one individual, I can't remember his name, Lord something or other, compared Occupy to a boil, saying that, if you don't lance it early on, if you don't stamp it out early on, it'll spread. And, aside from like how rude and what a mean way of putting it that was, he's accurate, he's right, because Occupy is popular, because Occupy, as much as it's been suppressed and as much as the message has been stamped on, it resonates. It's a simple set of saving the world mechanisms that anybody with half a brain and no shares in the stock market would support. So it did balloon, and then it continued through to May. And there's loads to say about Occupy Democracy, the Battle of the Tarpaulin Square. The trials are still ongoing. There were mass arrests. At least 50 people nicked through the process of that. It gave birth to, the reason I'm sort of skimming over it quickly, it warrants more attention. If you want to find out more about what that group has been up to, it's occupydemocracy.org.uk for a more comprehensive backstory. But I'm mentioning it now because it's the genesis of Ann Narkeh. We had the artist taxi driver, Chunky Mark, gave a phenomenal speech on the square, in which the take-home message for me was, we've got to occupy culture. We've got to take the culture back, because their mantra is kill the artist, kill the protest. And art is one of the most effective means of communicating these messages. So that resonated. And at an assembly on that day after everybody had heard that speech and other brilliant speakers speaking against the media monopoly scandal, in particular Donica McCarthy, who we'll come back to, because again he's a very interesting fella, and he's put a lot of energy into all of this effort. But between Donica, myself, and a few of us launched Occupy the Media Billionaires Working Group, so that was in the October, and we started scheming and have been extremely busy this year. And the Occupied Sun launched on the 1st of January. And for the month of January, I published one alternative headline or one alternative front cover Occupied Sun for each day of January. Took a little break, I'm rushing through a long story here. I should stop there. Maybe.
Well, we can come back. But yeah, I mean, from the occupied sun, which to me seems like the antithesis of things Murdoch. In terms of where the Sun gives you superfluous soft porn and dresses it up as news, or hate sensationalism. What it seems the occupied Sun does is gives astute, factually backed observations and real information about what real people are doing on the street to affect real change.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. Thank you. That's definitely part of what we've been trying to accomplish with it, with tongues firmly in cheek, with a big fat tongue firmly in cheek. Try and keep it funny and upbeat as well as covering all the crap that's happening at the moment. And yeah, it was very much we targeted Murdoch first of all. We had a occupation of Rupert Murdoch's headquarters in London in March. We stayed outside from the 23rd through the 29th of March, distributed printed copies of the Occupied Sun with some key information, which I suppose, again, this being the forum for it, this is the place to share that information. One of the speakers, Donica, brought to everybody's attention at Parliament Square how just 5 billionaire men own 80% of all the media in this country. Just 5 guys: Rupert Murdoch, Viscount Rothermere, Richard Desmond, and the Barclays brothers. And they pay no tax. They invade everybody's privacy with phone hacking, and they promote disastrous illegal warfare around the world.
Well, I mean, essentially they're setting the tone, aren't they? Yeah, hi, Anarchy, it's Jimmy here. I was just curious, during your occupations, what was the feedback from the general public? You know, like what did you get from their perceptions?
Personally, it's near universal support. Even people who are critical or not necessarily entirely receptive to everything that we're saying. Now, this is the key difference. Like I met Fabrice and Helen back in 2011 when Occupy All started, and back then it was harder work. The ratios were different. It was like maybe half and half, sort of people supportive and people not too sure. But this last year or so, the universal positive feedback from everybody. I think, you just got to look at what Paul Mason's now banging on about with this post-capitalism book to see how, and Thomas Piketty and this all these economists who are now rallying to share the good word. It's becoming a much more mainstream message. Like Jeremy Corbyn, again, I don't want to take up to it. I think personally I'm getting a bit sick of the Corbyn mania, but he's another example of how, you know, he's managed to politicise economics, which is something that governments have avoided doing since, well, it's certainly throughout my lifetime. I don't know how far back that goes. But he's politicised things like monetary reform and banking and all the quantitative easing for the people. So, yeah, the messages now are much more, people are ready for them. It's like we said in 2011, people aren't ready to hear all of this yet. You know, we need, sadly, we need more suffering and more austerity, and that's what we've had, and people are waking up.
In terms of people waking up and being able to, I mean, the advantage with, as you mentioned, occupying, and we occupied in Brighton at the same time, is that you are able to engage with a large group of people. I mean, and this is why, you know, being here on Dark City Radio, #1 for freedom of speech, is great, because hopefully it gives more opportunity to engage with people in more ways. And so, do you see that as a value in holding a location, or as you do with the Occupied Sun, holding a mental headspace?
Yeah, I think they're both equally important. I mean, when you're occupying physically, there's other ripples come out of it, because obviously it's not it's rarely comfortable. It often involves some sort of hard work, blood, sweat and tears, and that's evident. So there's an element of with people seeing the suffering is compelling. It's the same thing with the Battle of the Tarp. When we saw those people getting brutalised, it gets you out the sofa. It sort of shocks you into, right, now actually I've got to get up and do something about this now. You see a bunch of people shivering in tents in freezing cold rain, and you're less likely to assume that they're there for a giggle. Do you know what I mean? It's more obvious that you have the strength of your convictions.
Yeah, and especially as we saw in Brighton. I mean, this was one thing that amazed me when I was there, was how many people were in desperate need of a tent. How many people were in desperate need of just somewhere to lay their head where they could be safe. That kind of suffering becomes very evident when you're there on a street. People who have their needs focused through some of the most primal things. It can often be a real eye-opener, and of course a great motivator to expand the conversation, because if one cannot be aware that they're suffering to that gravity on your own doorstep, then there are obviously many more people out there who aren't aware, and bringing some of those stories to those people gives them the opportunity to be empowered to make that change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything which brings community together, it works as much as you just described it. The underclass, the people suffering at the very bottom with absolutely fuck all. It works as much at that end of the spectrum as it does at the other end of the spectrum. Like the amount of moneyed and wealthy people who I've met through doing Occupy and Love Activists and all the citizen journalism stuff, the amount of people who just bust your perception of the 1%, who absolutely, that they want to do something good with their money. Their money's like, a millstone around their neck. They want to invest it in something sensible, but they know that all these other things are corrupt, and they know that they can't just throw money at problems. They want to be involved, beyond that, like emotionally. And yeah, from both sides, seeing the absolute polarization, not just in terms of material wealth, but in terms of intellectual sort of political affiliations, like your extreme right wing and your extreme left wing finding parity. That sort of stuff, that can only happen, I think, when you bring people physically together. It's really difficult at the moment on the internet with algorithms and all the various. This is where I started with the fragmentation of our personalities. It happens en masse as much as it does on an individual level.
So, I mean, in terms of things like the internet, it's very easy to see a divisiveness on the internet, as opposed to people looking for the kind of agreement and consensus. And again, that sort of judgmental and I guess also the need of social networks to label things. So that I thought it was wonderful that Jeremy Corbyn spoke out about NATO recently, because if he wasn't in that debate, people wouldn't be able to say that, NATO are terrorists. There was a report that came out that said NATO torture and kill prisoners to death with, even if they haven't been convicted. And NATO, through Gladio, as we've discussed on this show with Martin Summers and others, are responsible for creating terrorist events that killed over 100 people.
Fabrice, don't you think it's interesting, speaking of Corbyn, the hatchet job, the very obvious hatchet job that the BBC are currently engaged in?
Well, I think quite a few people are bringing out some of the big guns with the media, and I think with Jeremy Corbyn, as you observe it, you can see that there is a definite agenda by which to paint Corbyn in a certain light, so that actually speaking out against NATO terrorism is seen as extremist. not morally ethical. And when you have the media functioning to that degree, the essence of something like the Occupied Sun is to essentially poke a caricature at that. I mean, do you find that Anarchy, when you focus on a particular issue that the media is running on a propaganda style line, do you find that people don't believe it as much?
It depends which people. It depends on the people. Like the choir is boisterous. The choir is buoyed up and up for it and get it. And that's ultimately they're not. I'm interested in preaching beyond the choir. I mean, that's why sort of wearing the wolf's clothing to a point. There's a lot of people don't notice the occupied on it, and they think it's the sun, and they comment as if it's the sun, which is hilarious and really satisfying to point out to them. It's not the sun; it's the occupied sun. But they're the people. I mean, really, what I want is for Daily Mail readers and Sun readers to just read it and accept it, because it bypasses the brain filter with that symbol, the symbol at the top, and people just accept it as, they internalise their association with it. But I don't think, basically, I can tell from my feed that the people the Occupied Sun reaches love it, and it's really popular with those people. But it's been partitioned off from your Daily Mail readers and your actual Sun readers, when they're the people that really we need to have this conversation with. So yeah, it's basically, it's a fun thing to do. It's quite lightweight.
But it's also there as, I guess, a resource to a certain degree to I guess, when people have the opportunity to engage with them, to increase the conversation and to find the cutting edge of the conversation. As what hopefully we aim for here in the bunker is to find out exactly where the focal points are, or the acupuncture points, where people can ask the pertinent questions and find the acupuncture points to leverage that change.
Yeah, it's very much about that, and that works best. Like the very best stuff that I've managed to do with the Occupied Sun has been in collaboration with other people. So, like early on, we had Danny and Mouse, the original Love Activists, the guys who helped set up or co-founded Love Activists. They wrote a bit regarding their tour. Donica has written a few pieces. Tarpaulin Simon has written for the Occupied Sun, and those efforts are generally more successful. Or when somebody gets in touch and says, "Can you do something on this?" Like the and then go and print it, and that's really satisfying for people to collaborate with people on producing something, which then somebody else goes and prints, which then somebody else goes and puts up. That's satisfying, and it's just much more powerful because there's real stuff happening there outside of the internet. Like we had the Sweetstopians did a piece did a front page to defend Sweetstopia, and the Troops, who are TREWPS, the Troops, Russell Brand's fan brigade, who have their own van, went and printed off a whole bunch of them, plastered their van in these things, loaded it up with all the materials that they needed at Sweetstopia, and went and did a delivery to help build the barricades up there.
Sweetstopia is quite an interesting one, because in I think Libertopia, a couple of micro-states have popped up in mainland Europe, and Sweetstopia, I believe, is the Sweetsway estate in Barnet, I believe. And it's again using art and humour and it itself as a focal point for people who wish to express themselves using those tools, has declared its independence as a microstate, I believe.
Yeah, well worth checking out Sweetstopia. I'm not sure how long they're going to be able to hold out there. I think they've been there 4 or 5 months now. Quick one, Annington Homes, property developer, wanted to evict the whole estate, went in and smashed up all these houses, and the Sweetstopians rebuilt the houses with reclaimed materials, their own handiwork. They're building permaculture sites. They've got all sorts of food growing out there, greenhouses, a school for eco-warriors. Just looks like an amazing place. I haven't visited it yet, but they've been live streaming a lot.
And so it's an interesting place to pick up that kind of knowledge, which isn't always easily available for people who do want to see, ways in which they can make more with less.
Yeah, and they look like they're having fun with it, and that's like a really valuable commodity at the moment. I think it's too easy to get dragged down with all of the weight of it. If you can manage to have fun, as those guys are having, if you can manage to play while resisting and while innovating new forms of resistance, then you're winning.
It's funny, isn't it? It's almost like teaching people to relearn how to use productivity as, not just a way of earning money, but a way of just generating goodness all around. Well-being, closer communities, just so much positivity. Yeah.
I mean, I'm loving the way Paul Mason's talking about all that at the moment, just because it's a different language. He's managing to express it in sort of highbrow intellectual language, but it's all the same shit. It's all love activism. It's all gift economy, sharing economy, for the love, not for the money. It's getting out there. It's a really exciting time.
Don't you think that the Paul Mason's very public, breakdown of the economic system, I can't remember if it was on Newsnight or it was on some BBC program. I think that was a real revelation to a lot of people. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Piketty and all of these, like the economics students have been in open revolt since 2011, though. So, I mean, to be honest, I was expecting this a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago to start. But I guess it's taken this long to build to a head that can actually pierce the 1%ers. There was that guy, the Amazon CEO as well, the guy who founded Amazon, wrote a piece for, I think it was Huffington Post, called "My Fellow 1%ers, the Pitchforks Are Coming." That came out a couple of years ago. So it's I think it's inevitable that it's going to. Well, it is inevitable that it's going to evolve and change. It's just how many of us are going to be consciously involved in those changes, because I think that's the ratio that's going to determine utopian from dystopian future, isn't it? It's how many of us are actually involved.
The programming that we've had for forever is that, like utopia is a fluffy, ridiculous concept. I can just accept dystopia. Yeah,
and not just accept it, but embrace it and live it. All the dark hero programming and the fairy princess, the Disney stuff, where we're just prepared to be these, to love that dark side, to love all the shit, everything that's crap, violence and destitution and.
I mean, it's interesting in terms of where people can break that, or when people can spot it. When people can spot the emperor's new clothes, as it were. And there's in terms of independent media, there's a gentleman by the name of Craig Murray, who was one time British ambassador to Uzbekistan. I think he's the only ambassador to have been sacked in the last century or so. And he has a blog, which is always worth catching. And I'm going to read a little bit about a little bit of one of his blogs. It is an astonishing fact that despite near universal recognition now that the war in Iraq was a disaster, no major British social institution is headed by a single one of the majority of the population who were opposed to the war. Every cabinet minister actively supported the war. Of 15 Tory MPs who rebelled and voted against the war, not one is a minister. Civil servants officially have no politics, but privately their opinions are known. There is not one single permanent undersecretary of a UK government department who was known to be against the war, and most were enthusiasts. Simon Fraser, Parliamentary Undersecretary at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, was an active Blairite enthusiast for the war. And although no Blairite himself, the head of MI6, Alex Younger, was also an enthusiast. The BBC, of course, gutted following its revelation of the truth about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and the subsequent murder of David Kelly. Following the ousting of Greg Dyke, both governors and director generals have been known supporters of the Iraq war. Every current editor of a UK national newspaper supported the Iraq war. A lot of the prominent columnists, David Aranovich, Nick Cohen, Melanie Phillips, Ron Liddell, have all had their careers flourishing. None suffered from their lack of judgment about voting to go to war, about encouraging the war. And ones who weren't in agreement with going to Iraq have had, career glitches. And that theme runs through all the public professions. Of the hundreds of academics who took firm positions against the Iraq war, there's not a single example of one who went on to be a university vice-chancellor or principal. And by contrast, actual war criminals like Richard Dearlove were parachuted into academic leadership posts. The chief of staff of the armed forces were all believers in Iraq, compared to the massive skepticism that existed amongst senior officers. The Iraq test even extends to the heads of institutions, apparently quite unrelated, such as the City of London banks and insurance companies. There are a tiny number of heads of FTSE 100 companies who are against the war. If there is not an Iraq test, Iraq seems to be a bit of a touchstone for people who can get into those positions. And there's a very strong correlation of support for the Iraq war and for support of austerity economics, for support of TTIP, multinational tax avoidance, low taxation, and the marketisation of public services, including education and health. To return to where I started, the extraordinary thing is there's a near universal recognition in wider society that the Iraq war was both completely unjustified and a dreadful strategic blunder. Yet its support is a major precondition for membership of the governing elite. Which is I've shortened a little bit, and you can read the whole thing at craigmurray.org.uk. But it goes to show that the people who are in the positions of national newspapers, of television companies, of academia, of our armed forces, all seem to have that certain block that there is such a thing, I guess, as a just war.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room. It's the elephant in virtually everybody's consciousness to some extent or other. If you'll indulge me, I'm just going to quickly there's a tiny little quote here from the Dalai Lama, which speaks to that. Most of us have been conditioned. Since armies are legal, we feel that war is acceptable. In general, nobody feels that war is criminal or that accepting it is criminal attitude. In fact, we have been brainwashed. War is monstrous. Its very nature is one of tragedy and suffering. That's the Dalai Lama. And
it's also illogical. It doesn't make sense, and that's the I think that comes into the fragmenting of society's perceptions.
In terms of media, if people don't like war, you surely have to find reasons to let people allow you to go to war. And I think that's an important part about checking the mainstream media, because all those TV channels find war acceptable. All the newspapers were pro-invasion.
Yeah, and we just, partition off and we section off those parts of our minds that are like, well, no, that makes no sense. It's madness. It's sheer bloody madness. Literally, it's destroying the planet. It's destroying hundreds of thousands, millions of people's lives. So we can't think about it. We have to shut off from it, because otherwise, we burn out, we become depressed, we get paralyzed by the fear of it all. We have to put it in that dark little place in our minds so that we can carry on. But yeah, I think now more than ever, because it's. We could talk all night about the state of geopolitics and how it's been escalating and the scale of it at the moment.
In terms of checking it, you mentioned the artist Taxi Driver a little earlier. I'm a great advocate for recording and cop blocking, recording authority or so-called authority to make sure they do what they say on the tin. And many more people are utilising live streaming. So. Yeah. I was just going to say, how do you think those forms of empowerment, where because it's easier to have a camera these days and be able to stream live than it ever was, how do you think those are checking things such as the war narrative, such as the austerity narrative?
I think in terms of checking the war narrative, it's always going to be that's the big one. That's the one, the military-industrial complex, the most organised, scary mob in the world that nobody wants to stand up to. So I think that's always going to be the harder fight. I think the austerity narrative is now, we've got Corbyn, the mainstream media is now starting to report on some of what's actually been happening, but that's the softer target. I'm really interested in how we approach the former, basically, and like currently I'm involved in. Well, I'm putting together materials for Stop the Arms Fair, which is the world's largest arms fair. DSEI is returning to London Docklands. They set up on the 15th. And Stop the Arms Fair.
That's an annual arms fair, isn't it? It's one of the
I think it's once every 2 years. I think I've heard it described as the biggest in the world, and it's once every 2 years. Unless
I'm mistaken, I think they were arranging the selling of cluster bombs, which
that was exposed by one of the only honest politicians in Westminster, Caroline Lucas MP. In 2011, DSEI promoted illegal cluster bombs, which are banned by the UK and 100 countries. So that's just one. There's so many things wrong with DSEI, and Stop the Arms Fairs organised this exciting timetable of events themed. Each day is themed around one of those reasons why you would want to join the resistance to endless war.
Well, I can think of about 700 million reasons. I think there's 700 million pounds worth of arms subsidies.
Yeah, I'd call that one reason. There's at least 7 billion human beings that are worth opposing the arms fair and the illegal arms trade. And this is a barely legal arms trade. We're selling weapons to people on. Sorry, not we. The UK government, UK Gov PLC, is selling arms to countries on its own list of human rights abusers. There are enough reasons why you'd want to. So, yeah, if you're able,
countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, where women can only drive cars with a male guardian, where I think they've beheaded 100 people this year, some for the crime of black magic and sorcery. In 2015, and we're selling them not just arms, but arms and police training. And I believe David Henke and Exara have been looking into the Ministry of Justice selling them legal services, so they can make beheadings look like they're some form of legitimate justice, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia beheaded twice as many people as ISIS this year, and they're one of our clients.
They're one of our major arms sales. I know. I think ever since the days of Mark Thatcher and Prince Bandar Sultan bin Aziz, Prince Bandar Bush, as he's commonly known as, them sorting out billion-pound kickbacks off arms deals. So I know there are probably quite a number of thousands, probably tens of thousands of people who work in some way with armaments industries, but surely there can be better work that they can be doing involving livingry rather than killingry.
Absolutely. And yeah, better work, arms to renewables. Like, that's the core message. That's where we need to be going. That's the conversation we need to be having, is all of this energy, resourcefulness, like all the good eggs, all the people who joined the military for the right reasons, because they believed in the rhetoric, because they didn't they didn't realize, or they still don't realize just how corrupt the whole thing is. All that energy, money, time, ingenuity, stick that into sustainables. Like, what would the world be like if we mobilized for, actually dealing with the climate crisis? If Obama traveling to...
Or mobilised, as you said, there are 7 billion jolly good reasons to make sure everybody has food and water and shelter, and that would probably be a good start, especially for the people who don't have that tonight. And you say the arms fair is starting on the 12th, but you're at, the occupation is ahead of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, the occupation's intended to blockade, to disrupt the setting up of the arms fair. The arms fair it's scheduled from the 15th, but the occupation, the occupation has been organised to handle the evening times. Stop the Arms Fair campaign against the arms trade had already organised this calendar of events from the 7th to the 12th. So each day themed on a different aspect of the arms industry, the arms trade, and Occupy Democracy are going to support by organising through the night shifts. So all available occupiers, get to the barricades, 7th to the 12th of September. There's more information on that same website, the working group occupydemocracy.org.uk.
And that's great. And there's also a Stop the Arms Fair Facebook group, as of course there is you can find the Occupied Sun there as well.
Yeah. And Occupy the Arms Fair has a Facebook group which is organising. They had a reconnaissance tonight, and apparently there's free parking in the Holiday Inn from 5:30, which is useful for anybody who's just coming along for a night or two, or you can drive around in the day, or just useful to have spaces for that are more comfortable.
Yeah, and a place to hopefully keep a few things safe.
Just out of interest, Anarkeh, do you ever get any ex-military bods show up to these things, like voicing their concerns?
I'm not going to name names, but I know of more than one occupier who is ex-military, yeah.
No, that's awesome and really important, I think.
There's a Facebook page, Occupy Marines, which is worth looking at. They post some great stuff. I think we reached peak whistleblower about 2006, man. I think, between WikiLeaks, Assange, Manning, Snowden, you in the digital age, ignorance is a choice.
Yeah, that's
tumbleweed.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong there. I mean, we're just running, I think, into about the last 10 minutes of the show now, and in terms of military and people who need the help, because some of the people that we came across in Brighton were ex-military, and some of them having a very hard time dealing with the repercussions of that. And you've worked with the love activists. Would you like to tell us a little bit about them in the end of the show?
Okay, I'll do my best. I mean, long story short, love activists started in London again out of the Battle of the Tarpaulin. So the occupiers weren't being allowed to rest or to sleep, and so this crew of squatters went and cracked a building for activists to go and get some actual rest in, so they didn't burn out, which is another important thing to talk about, but we'll get to that. That blossomed, that grew into, by Christmas, they'd cracked a bank. They cracked a different building for each month's occupation. They cracked a bank next to Trafalgar Square just before Christmas, and they announced and planned to do a big Christmas spread, Christmas dinner for the homeless in London. They were housing about 100 homeless people in the bank. And then they got illegally evicted on Christmas Eve, which was quite nasty by all accounts, outside of it being Christmas, that I think was quite heavy-handed. They managed to get an out-of-hours judge to grant them the right to... he signed a bit of paper that said under no circumstances should they be prevented from re-entering the building, but they were prevented from re-entering the building by the police, who built barricades outside the front of the bank to protect it. The love activists used those barricades to build a street kitchen and succeeded in doing their Christmas dinner anyway. Like hundreds and hundreds of people from all over London, all over the country, got down there with food. They had a gourmet chef, like proper in the uniform, with roast turkey, all the trimmings. They were evicted from that site. That street kitchen remained there until New Year's Eve, when they were evicted. During that eviction, one fella on one of the live streams just sort of nudged the live stream and went, "Yeah, come with me." Live stream was killed for about 5-10 minutes. When it came back up, that fella was halfway up this massive tree in Trafalgar Square doing a banner drop, Homes Not Banks, off this Christmas tree in Trafalgar Square. And so they relocated the kitchen there. It stayed there for a long time. I'm not sure exactly where that is in London now, but moving through this quite long months and months of work story, they went on tour around the country, spreading the word, setting up kitchens in different cities around the country. And love activists then around the country started setting up their own groups. I've had most contact with the one in Brighton. I did a bit of reportage from the Brighton-based love activists street kitchen. There's one in Hastings. There's a group in Liverpool. Can't remember all of the different sites, but there's tons around the country now. There's a network. All the same principle: just get together, get the stuff that people need, that people don't have, by hook or by crook. Just get it there, and then redistribute it to the people that need the stuff, the food, the clothes, the love and human contact, compassion. So really exciting. Each of those groups, from what I can gather, has their own politics, their own way of organising and getting the materials and redistributing them. I found the group in Brighton really interesting because they've adopted a no money policy. So they've rejected money altogether, taken it completely out of the equation, and been massively successful as a result of that, for a variety of reasons. There's a YouTube channel for The Occupied Sun, / The Occupied Sun, I think, with a report from Brighton Street Kitchen. And that's still going. That runs every Sunday. The Hastings Kitchen runs every Sunday.
And the Hastings one had a little bit of an an with being able to keep up what they were doing. Because I remember signing a petition supporting them, because there was obviously a need for it, because it was being well used.
Yeah, that petition incidentally got like 2,000 something signatures in less than a day, and at that time the council just naffed off. From what I can gather, they just left them to it, and then just recently they've been back in touch, and they want one of the organisers to go on the books. It's always about getting the organisers on the books. That's what they want. They want to quantify the churn so that they can take their piece of that pie. They don't understand the pie, evidently. But they want somebody down on the books and they want them churning through health and safety for food regs, for God knows, business rates. But anyway, the Hastings crew have shifted. They're now called Hastings Love Picnic, which I think gets them round in some sort of legalese, a bit of meandering there. I'm just noticing we're nearly out of time, and I wanted to mention a couple of other things, if I might.
Yeah, go. By all means.
So the first one, well, real quick, realmedia.press is another of these fantastic citizen journalist efforts to replace the corrupt corporate media with some actual journalism. They're aggregating news sources from citizen journalists routinely. So that's a good alternative to Google aggregated news, realmedia.press.
Realmedia.press, and so that's where if people have something that they can document in their area, that's a good place to get in touch with.
It's more if you are a citizen journalist and you're producing stuff, get on their radar, because their radar is sort of assimilating what's happening in real time, and then it's like a real time RSS feed of the alternative press.
Excellent.
So rather than having to trawl through all of your sources and navigate Facebook, it will just bring together all of like a whole bunch of credible, good news sources, and give you the best of that, or what's trending on the alternative scene that day. Real quick, Compassionate Revolution, compassionaterevolution.com, I think, or possibly .co.uk. Look it up; it will come up. Another really good kind of love activist-y, post-capitalist-y action. What it says on the tin, Compassionate Revolution.
Brilliant. Ben, before we end, I just got a couple of shout-outs as well coming in from the chat room, so I just want to get them in quickly, if that's all right. Firstly, there's an update for Sweetstopia, which I'm afraid isn't great. Some private security guards have gone in, dragged somebody out of a building that isn't covered by the court order, and the police have turned up and they're not upholding the court order. They're letting it happen, so that's a shame. But I'm just giving you a live information stream there. You can get a live stream off Sarah Chalk's Facebook as well. Also, Sarah Chalk would like me to give a shout out for her. She's collecting clothes to send to Calais for refugees. Anyone local to her in Worthing, West Sussex, could you please help? She can pick up locally, or you can deliver to her. Find her on Facebook as Sarah Chalk, or on Twitter as Sarah Chalk 99.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice one. Oh, that's shit news. I hope they were live streaming. That's another.
There is a live stream now, yeah, and it has been live streamed. So yeah, it is shit news. But I just thought I should update as we were talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's good they were live streaming. It's worth mentioning, like, live streaming is a whole show in itself. I think at the moment it's so contentious. Like, I know of myself, Sergeant Ginger Chris, Obi from the Occupy News Network, Nina, who's actually she had her press card. She's NUJ, all arrested while filming protests and while evidently being there to film protests. Arrested, put through the courts, equipment seized. I'm still trying to get my camera back. So there's that side of it, which would appear like the establishment don't like being filmed. And then there's the other side of it, which is all of the people that we're trying to support who don't want to be filmed. Like, I got back from Runnymede from something I've done to a meme from my local Antifa, all about put down your camera and join the protest. It's like both cases. Anyway, it's a long conversation, but.
For sure. I mean, and it's a great thing. It's an empowering thing to have with live stream, just as it's empowering to be here on Dark City Radio. And coming up this evening after the Bunker Show, we've got the Cannabis Compassion Club, and they've got a guest, Michelle X, who is a bit of a legend. She's a medical cannabis user who has MS, and she's been arrested 3 times for growing her medicine. And she's standing up for her beliefs and is quite an inspirational person. So that's going to be a great show. And after that at 9, we've got my good friend Captain Max Steele and his guest Derek White Sky Cloud, who is a psychic medium, shamanic healer, and a paranormal investigator. We're just about out of time, so I'm going to say goodbye to my guys in the bunker.
Good night, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, good night, and thanks for a great conversation, Anarchy.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks ever so much, Anarchy. It was fantastic.
Nice one.